The cloud, yeah. Great. So what we'll do is, as normal, we'll post the recording on YouTube, so anybody who isn't here today can still kind of listen into it. So I'm really pleased to introduce Shantanu Tilak today. So Shantanu has published an article in the Cybernetics Society's journal, which is Enacting Cybernetics. If you want to have a look around the journal, just Google Enacting Cybernetics or look at the link on one of the emails I sent around. So Shantanu is going to take us through his work around based around Gordon Pask's conversation theory. So I think without any further ado, Shantanu, I shall pass to you, and then what we'll do, as it's a small group in a slightly shorter time today, we'll finish at 6:30 today UK time. We won't do breakouts. So after the presentation, we'll then go into kind of traditional style rolling Q&A and comments. So over to you, Shantanu.
Thank you. Okay, so this is my presentation today about Gordon Pask's work, just to give you guys some more context. I'm an educational psychologist. I graduated with my PhD last year from the Ohio State University, and I worked with Dr. Michael Glassman on technology-assisted collaborative learning approaches. And I started delving into the cybernetics literature maybe towards the end of my PhD degree, maybe towards the second year, third year of it, I think. And it was because my advisor and I saw links between the development of early approaches to psychology that, are now canon, like social cognition, behaviorism, cognitive psychology, as well as constructivism and theories of cybernetics. So the first article that I ever wrote that explicitly used cybernetics was to look at those links across history. And you can find that in Theory and Psychology. It was published in 2022. After that, in my program, I extensively studied Lev Vygotsky and Jean Piaget's work, just because I am interested in human development in the digital age and how development occurs through linguistic practices that are now mediated by technology. So rather than shying away from technology in educational settings, the call that my lab made at OSU was to say, well, we need to educate students, both young and old, whether they're lifelong learners or whether they're K-12 learners. We need to equip them with the skills to civilly use technology and engage in meaning making using technology because it is here to stay. And we need to simulate the processes that students engage in on the internet in classrooms so that they learn how to navigate the internet in a more adaptive, in a more civil manner, which is arguably a counterpoint to a lot of the literature that is talking about limiting the use of technology in the classroom today. So my work has taken several directions. If you scan the QR code, you will see this presentation and you can follow along, but you can also see my other research that has looked at how college students, elementary students, middle schoolers, and now even high schoolers ever since I started running this lab school that I'm working at right now, I've been able to also study neurodivergent kids. And I've also worked with principals and teachers extensively. And the thrust of my work has mainly been to organize machine dependent and machine independent collective action, which finds strong corollaries with Gordon Pask's work. Both conversation theory and interaction of actors theory are not theories, but theories of theories, right? The way that they are put in the terse literature that Pask wrote, which is, kind of sometimes hard for even me to digest. But what I did glean from it that it's a great approach to use to design educational settings and to expose the conversational mechanisms occurring in both machine-mediated and non-machine mediated collaborative settings in classrooms. So of course, I will start this presentation by talking about cybernetics and specifically second order cybernetics. In general, cybernetics is a discipline that looks at, it's a transdiscipline, right? It looks at the connections between fields or the inquiries occurring at the boundaries between fields. and it helps understand how both living and artificial systems change in their environments. Now, what is the difference between first order and second order cybernetics? This field was conceived of as one that focused on creating machines that replicated both the structure and function of the human nervous system in some ways. But of course, these early investigations did not consider the explicit participation of the observer in changing variables associated with those systems. Um, where the observers were sort of implicitly there tweaking variables in an experiment, for example. And psychology, I would say, also still follows this first order idea where we're sort of like big brother, I would say, like observing, right? I worked on several Institute of Education Sciences grants during my time at Ohio State, and sure, we did call them like design-based research, but there was a power structure between the participants and I all the time. And I would argue that that's it's hard to say that any situation like that is inherently objective in human subjects research. I feel like even though there is a boundary between observers and observed, it's very hard to have a fully unbiased experiment with human subjects research. Which is why I found the idea of the inclusion of the observer into psychological research, which is the basic thrust of second order cybernetics, participant observation, the idea of the socio-technical system as being rewired by observers, but used by research participants who then interface with one another to improve tools, for example. I think all of this is very powerful to use in educational settings and in educational psychology to co-design educational experiences with participants that meet their needs. So this humanistic turn in cybernetics really, 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 I would say, benefited my work. Gordon Pask is, one cybernetician who adopted second order cybernetics or this participant observation idea. He entered the field in 1959, right, and made this demonstration about changes in network systems, showing that applying electronic potential to any one part of the network of electrodes, and wires caused a ripple effect across the others. And I would say that this is like a metaphor for like a classroom. I think it's a great metaphor for a classroom where students are collaborating with one another and the teacher, right? And the changes that occur in one part of the collaborative system sort of ripple through the rest, changing perspectives in the whole system, right? So this is a physical demonstration that Pask made that I would think is a metaphor for any classroom or any educational setting. So as you can see, he initially did work on creating machines that were physical analogs to show the growth of concepts. He also worked with Stafford Beer to create a device that mimicked the functioning of an ear. But they did, later on in their work, I think towards the 60s, realize that they needed to focus on the systems, on human machine systems where problem solving occurs, right? And today these are called socio-technical systems. If you read Behemer and Flack's article about socio-technical systems, it shows strong corollaries between this initial seed of thought that Beer and Pask had. And I often talk about that link in the papers that I write using Pask's theories or approaches. So Pask cybernetics, both conversation theory and interaction of actors theory. I think Dr. Dizu is in the audience, so hi, please. If I'm erring anywhere, please feel free to tell me. But both interaction of actors theory and conversation theory offer ways to design and structure out machine-dependent and independent collective action broadly. So in the field of education, you can help understand how students use technology, how they even use social media in their informal lives. I feel like these are very powerful frameworks to structure out what conversations are occurring in those settings. And that's mainly how I've used it, rather than using the complex notation to program technologies or create entailment meshes and digital tools. I just think it becomes easier to structure out experiments using conversation theory and then uncover what's going on in those conversations qualitatively. So you can see that there are a few differences between conversation theory and interaction of actors theory, where in interaction of actors theory, the conversations are sort of endless and maybe more informal, whereas in conversation theory, they're restricted to a certain topic or uh, network of ideas that are usually housed within a machine. So I'll just explain this briefly using the idea of the M individual and P individual. So proto-logic or LP is a sort of it's a sort of protocol that you can use to group together knowable concepts of what can be learned and how in a specific domain. With something like the internet, which is super expansive, and we are working on technologies that use the whole internet as its entailment structure, if that makes sense. The internet becomes the whole universe of knowable ideas in a search engine, for example, and it will draw out ideas based on what you input. But broadly in that interaction, you and the computer are both M individuals, right? You're hunks of flesh, and you embody ideas or P individuals together. So any P individual can be processed by multiple M individuals, or any two or more M individuals can also process a P individual together. So at the end of the day, all the P individuals need to be embodied in an M individual. The entailment structure is all the possible concepts that could be discussed in a system. An entailment mesh is a subset of topics or interlinked coherences that are drawn from this entailment structure. And an epistemological laboratory is the machine. I would argue that it's possibly an M individual loaded with software, computer, right, that mediates these conversations. So I have abridged these diagrams a little bit because that P is actually embodied by M and EL. You could argue that they are embodied like that, but it's just slightly abridged so that there aren't too many linkages in this diagram. So with conversation theory, there has to be an exemplary set of expert-driven concepts to guide analytic distinctions to be made, right? Or what ideas and concepts are embodied by machines and humans, or between machines or between humans. So if Pask applied conversation theory to very domain-specific settings, like learning probability or learning about cell biology, for example, and he created tools such as Cast and Thought Sticker that contained neighborhoods of these specific concepts. So you can see that the entailment structure is housed within the machine, and then it creates this proxy or P individual of that epistemological laboratory, which then the human's P individual interacts with to create new insights, right? So the initial universe of concepts actually comes from here. But in interaction of actors theory, these are built up in an emergent fashion. And you can look at interaction of actors theory as describing potentially endless conversations or even informal conversations that go in varied directions. Or I would say you could even use it to describe the use of internet technologies. So in the first panel, you can see that the individual, this is a hypothetical example about an individual interacting with a search engine. The P individual created by the epistemological laboratory emerges from the interaction between the human and the machine, rather than it being defined by this entailment structure. So it's open-ended as compared to being defined or predefined by an expert who designed the machine. In panel 2, you can see that there are distributed interactions occurring like on a social media platform, for example. So many M individuals interact mediated by the technology to then develop one joint P individual, and also may look at the ideas housed within the technology already, like previous posts or reposts or breaking news headlines, for example. why is any of this useful, right? It's just to the lay person, it may just seem like a bunch of bubbles to notate the way things are going. But for a psychologist like me, it really allows me to take extremely complex collaborative settings, educational settings, and then structure out the interactions that I think are going to occur within them, and then compare what has actually occurred to how I structured them out, right? So it gives me an idea of how I can work with participants as co-observers, I would say, to design these conversations better in real time, which is what Pask wanted to do, right? So I can really I can look at the process diagrams I've created, which is I think the most simple use of Pask's theories, as opposed to, designing a technology, which is something that Dr. Pangaro and like the other folks that I am working with right now, they're doing that in the background. But my main concern is to take the technology and apply it with a set of participants and see what happens, right? That's the part of Pask's work that intrigues me personally. So yes, we do work with Pask's approaches to program tools. That is beyond my pay grade. But I do enjoy using his work to structure out the experiments that I run, both at the school and also while during the course of my university work. Um, so on the whole, what's the purpose, right? You're designing the two parts of a socio-technical system using Pask's work, right? So you're designing scenarios for humans to use technologies, but you're designing technologies themselves, because participants or research participants give you feedback about technology, and then that tells you how to change how you're programming them. So I would say that it's this feedback loop between human subjects research and then using insights from human subjects research to build new tools. Um, so does the user play a different role? So yes, right? So in all of these approaches, you're turning the user into an observer who observes how this technology works with you, right? And you're asking them to provide design insights to you to then fundamentally change how those tools look, or how the concepts housed within those tools can better serve their needs by being altered in some way or fashion. Um, so that brings me to looking at some of the projects that we've done using Pask's approaches. And first, I will focus on designing technologies just because these projects are fewer in number, just because I'm not a programmer. So when I get to work with one, I'm usually super happy, just because they can take what I'm thinking and like implement it. So I was super lucky to, of course, start working with Dr. Pangaro and Dr. Scott, but he gave me this demo of a search engine called Thought Shuffler in 2022, which was developed as a response to the lack of critical thinking in online search. And it uses a very simple algorithm, much simpler than Google's, more consumer-driven algorithm that purely functions or derives sources based on your searches, based on keyword co-occurrence. And you can put in these keywords separately in separate text boxes. And it only looks at the richest co-occurrences between these keywords based on the user's input. So it's much more simplistic than Google. What extant literature says about users interacting with the page ranking algorithm or the Google algorithm is that they power scroll a lot, and they don't really compare the sources that they are getting for veracity and for, strength of argument. But with Thought Shuffler, the interesting thing is that it's super minimal. You can input keywords separately rather than as Boolean phrases, and its algorithm only looks at the co-occurrences, right? So you're always presented with the richest sources first. So the results appear as these arrays of cards, and these cards are arranged horizontally, and each result can be parsed to show which keywords it contains. So the users can then look at snippets of it that contain the keywords, take notes about them, and they can also open multiple sources and searches at a time. So I can have two searches going on about warring topics, and I can then compare the sources between the two searches in real time. I can also take down notes on the side. It isn't shown here, but there's an author button somewhere here. I think it's like here. at the bottom. And if you click it, it'll open a separate note card where you can like take notes about like what you're searching for. So far we have studied the use of Thought Shuffler and Google um, through a grant that was funded by the Ohio State University. They gave us, I think, around $10,000 to study Thought Shuffler's use in an experimental manner. And so we recruited 39 undergraduate students, late adolescents and adults, to use both search engines and write an essay about universalized and privatized healthcare. And they wrote these essays, they typed these essays out in an hour using both search engines. They were shown tutorials for both search engines before. And then we basically analyzed the essays using the LIWC tool, which is the Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count tool. And we saw that there was more anger-related words in the Google essays about healthcare, and there was more morality-related words about health, these topics in the Thought Shuffler essays. We also did a second study that used the coding scheme to test the argumentative structure of these essays. And we saw that those using Thought Shuffler exhibited higher reflectivity, or they were able to look at both sides of the coin and sort of come up with a concrete solution to the problem, as opposed to those using Google, who mainly looked at one side of the argument in their answers most of the time. We did a third study that is currently under review with the ACM Digital Library for their special, I think it's a special issue on recommender systems for good, so it was a perfect fit for this article. But we did a lexical network analysis of the essays to produce a word cloud showing the strength of co-occurrences between terms in both groups. And what we saw was that the Thought Shuffler essays had more three-way connections between terms than the Google essays. And also that, so we did a second analysis within this lexical analysis that also created topic models to show the dominant topics in each of the groups. And the Thought Shuffler topics went far beyond just universal and privatized healthcare. They were talking about morality, the economic structure of countries, about government, as compared to Google essays, which mainly featured words from the prompt itself, which was another super interesting finding from this group of studies. So we have two of these published, and I can share them via email later. You can also find them on my ResearchGate page. But that's one of the technologies we worked on designing using Pask's theory. Because the algorithm was designed using a conversation theory approach in Lisp. We're currently working on converting it into Python. We're also working on designing a working prototype of Thought Sticker in Python right now. And seeing how the formalisms that Pask proposed work in practice digitally. But then, of course, my job then would be to take these tools, and I run a laboratory school with 120 kids with learning differences here. So my next step will be to test the technology with my students and also with the university that I teach at. So I would have both neurotypical and neurodivergent participants to test it with. We also just submitted a Spencer grant for Thought Shuffler, to study Thought Shuffler just a little more with neurodivergent participants, just because our first 39 participants were neurotypical, and I don't think we're considering the widest range of feedback to redesign this thing yet. And I think that that second study will sort of help, which is why I asked the Spencer Foundation to sort of support it, and I hope that they do, because it would be a great step in the right direction for us, the team that's working on reprogramming this thing, yeah, with Dr. Pangaro. So yes. So I talked about designing technologies, but of course it's important to say that technologies are used in social settings usually, and if they're used in the classroom, you got to design that curriculum or the way that you're using technology in that classroom effectively. And conversation theory can really, 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 really help with that as well. I would say it's added a lot of structure to the work that I've been able to do in classrooms so far. So one project that I did at Ohio State University in this actually emerged super spontaneously, and we had an IRB for self-report measures and collecting discussion posts and analyzing discussion posts already. We started to approach it in a slightly different manner in this graduate seminar that my advisor held. Had 17 graduate students, and we did Reddit live chats, if you guys have heard of those. They're discontinued now, but you used to be able to chat in a live stream type of fashion on Reddit, rather than using an asynchronous blogging mechanism. And so what we did was we started this 17-week, was it 17 weeks or 15 weeks, I think, of class. We started it with asynchronous blogging. And what we would do every class is we'd analyze the network quality of the blogs produced by the students. And of course, in the first session, we saw that posting asynchronously was not leading to conversations. So we then rewired the curriculum, right, in the following sessions to use live chats instead of blogs. And then we saw the transitivity increase of that network as the weeks passed by. We then started tweaking the group structure to further increase transitivity, or asking students whether they would prefer to use their own prompts or propose their own prompts to the rest of the class, and whether that would increase the engagement that they showed in conversation. And what we saw was that both eigencentrality, which is this orange line, right, upon tweaking it in the direction which they wanted it to be changed to engage them better, it increased their eigencentrality, which means is there egalitarian participation in the network, but it stabilized the transitivity of the network over time. If you see, like, it reaches a plateau towards the end. And it comes back to where it was before. This is spring break in week 9, and it rises after, if you can see, because we started changing the group structure to be smaller. Then we started making multiple smaller groups, which increased the average transitivity of the classroom. So why is this Paskian? It's because we took insights. We didn't wait until the end of the semester to say, oh, this is what happened, and we need to change the curriculum in this so-and-so manner after everything is done. Pask would have thought that that's a waste of time, right? His goal was to look at things in real time and help people in real time. So like that's what we tried to do. We tried to look at network quality in this classroom on a week-to-week basis. It's a once-a-week class. And what we did was, you can see that this diagram has an interrelationship between the live chat, lecture, and presentation. So we had field notes about the lecture and the presentations and whether the students were participating more in those when we started doing this action science type approach to redesign the discussions every class. And we saw that there was better participation in Dr. Glassman's class. There was more back and forth conversations during student presentations when we started taking their needs into stock. So it's super important to see that working in this participatory way, even with graduate students, really helps them better their learning experience in the classroom. So that's the first study. One of the first studies that we did using Pask's work, and I would say it's a loose application of conversation theory, but more so an application of the ethos of participatory design that comes from Pask's work. Similarly here, again, 22 undergraduate students and I became co-observers in my spring, was it my spring class? I think it was my spring class at Virginia Wesleyan University, where I serve as psychology faculty. And again, this idea came about super spontaneously, where I assign a storyboard assignment to my kids every semester, my undergrads, my freshmen, and my sophomores. And a lot of them can't draw. So they came to me, I think a few weeks before like the assignment was due. Like my German exchange student came to me actually and was just like, why don't we use AI to generate the storyboards? And I mean, usually I would be extremely terrified of using AI in my class, because I have gotten in trouble for using it at Ohio State when I was a teaching assistant, but I'm faculty now, so I could say yes. So I was just like, you know what? Like, I'm gonna say yes. let's try. And they were just like, oh, you're making this easier for us. But the truth is, I made it much harder for them because they had to create 10 storyboard frames by consistently prompting the AI at home, and it had to be a cogent story with the same character and 10 frames. So they were just shocked at how hard it got to do that. So I said, why don't we recount these conversations together where, you can see that the students, the Gen AI and the computer and the instructor are M individuals, right? The students bring their prior knowledge. The Gen AI has its training data. The two interact to create a first draft of this storyboard. But then I step into the equation and give them feedback on that first draft, and then they create a new one after reprompting the AI. So we recounted the conversations that went on during this process, and then we tried to understand whether elements of photography played a role in them prompting the AI. So what we saw was that the three variables, outlined by previous scholars in AI-mediated design, the mise-en-scène, dispositif, and cultural object, which refer to the interaction between objects in the frame, the way that images are processed, or like the quality that they acquire when you prompt a certain way, and then the cultural object or themes associated with mundane objects, celebrities, popular culture, all played an important role in prompting. Some students discovered an ingenious way to keep characters consistent was by turning celebrities into characters in their storyboards. But of course, we had to disclaim that these storyboards are not an accurate depiction of celebrity lifestyles because there's, ethical implications associated with that. So those were the victories that they were able to apply, principles in photography and in popular culture, tropes in popular culture to achieve desired end products and cogently tell stories and multimodally through this feedback process. But then they also recounted their difficulties, which was, with adding text to images, right? A lot of this text that you see is actually typed out by the students because the AI produces illegible text when you add it to images sometimes. Keeping the characters consistent. Again, some of the students didn't figure out that they can just prompt a celebrity to be the character, so they had trouble doing that. And a lot of kids would want to showcase diversity through their AI generated storyboards, and they saw that a lot of the tropes produced were Caucasian or heteronormative, which sort of made them a little sad, but then they worked harder to prompt it to like make that better. I will say that a lot of them said this is just fundamentally different than doing this without AI or drawing it, because then I could just put my ideas on paper. But then the other flip side was also true, where it said a lot of them said I can't draw, and this gave me the confidence to give you something that actually looked okay. Whereas if I maybe didn't have that opportunity, I would maybe pick to do two papers instead of doing a storyboard. So they were just like, I'm glad I got to interact with multimodal tools, right, that give me the opportunity to express myself in these diverse ways. And so the special thing about this study and what makes it cybernetic or second order, it implements second order cybernetics, is that the students co-authored the paper with me rather than being research participants. So all of us were just co-observers rather than research participants and scholars observing them. A second similar project was, so I'm in more context, I'm building one of the first online special education schools in the country, in the US, and I'm using virtual reality extensively in this curriculum. And the learning curve for my teachers, so I have a team of 4 teachers working with me right now that teach the core subjects to these students. And I have a very small cohort of 3 kids right now that we're working with on the pilot. I aim to have full enrollment next year, but we were seed funded to do this for 2 years and test the curriculum out. Forbes magazine worked with us on the seed funding. And I think we've raised close to $500,000 to support this curriculum. So it's going well, but we'll definitely be padding it with more grants because I want there to be a little bit more security for when I'm enrolling students in case I don't get enough students, if that makes sense. So it's an uphill battle right now getting this off the ground. But my teachers were panicking last summer just because we had to develop sixth, seventh, and eighth grade curriculum for this middle school idea. And they had to learn how to use VR to do it. So like I actually was taking them into headset virtual reality every week and like drilling concepts into them as to how you can create worlds for kids, which is a hard concept to digest for American public school teachers. So I had to really get them out of their comfort zone. So I wanted to do anything I could for them to reduce the time that they were using to develop curriculum. And so we found this language model, and I've worked with Adil Khan before. I've met him at several conferences in the US. And he actually plugged the tool for me at an independent schools conference that I was at last year. And so I decided to give this to my teachers to use to develop lesson plans and blueprints for lesson plans that they could then adapt to make their own. Um, so we interacted with the Magic School AI language model to develop lesson blueprints every week for 8 weeks. And we recounted 4 weeks of that process, just one lesson plan each subject. And what we did was we didn't individually prompt the AI. We sat in a workshop setting together. And 5 of us would work together to create a prompt, and then we would re-prompt it together too to create one draft of like each lesson. And then we would give the teacher in charge of that lesson the lesson blueprint and ask them to go adapt it. And then what we did was, as a group, each of us reflected on the process that we followed, but then also made comments on that AI lesson plan to say, what did I alter and why? Right? Like what makes this not mine? And how can I make it mine by recounting what I think and sort of making that part of the conversation as well. Um, so the main perceptions that we recounted based on the study was a 4-week study, after which data analysis ensued, and the whole thing happened for 8 weeks, and the teachers just went and worked on their own after. So the perception was that AI doesn't know each child, of course. Like we have a very diverse group of children that we serve. They usually are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, specific learning disability, cerebral palsy, several other health impairments that are also comorbid with anxiety and depression sometimes. So we have a lot of twice exceptional kids. We have a lot of kids with comorbid mental health concerns. So there's no one way to individualize instruction for a student with a reading difficulty or for a kid that, has limited social skills. It would function differently depending on the student. So when we would try to add as many checks in place into the lessons by prompting the AI, honestly, the adaptations were slightly lackluster. So the teachers had to go and work on the lesson plans themselves. And that's the insight that we got from the study. We're sure you can account for some needs, but only the teacher knows the students in the classroom, right? So that's the person that has to operate on AI mediated output to make it better, to make it applicable to the context that they're in. They also felt that exercising this co-agency or hive mind and prompting AI led to better prompts and also better output. Um, and bringing your previous experience or competence about AI tools, a lot of these teachers have used ChatGPT before. So there was always comparisons to ChatGPT. So we actually went ahead and tested ChatGPT in one of the sessions, and we saw that it was slightly better at making unit plans as compared to individual lesson plans, which is again something that practitioners can benefit from knowing in case they want to reduce their time in building things, with the caveat that they are going to work on those lesson plans generated by it or unit plans generated by it, of course, make them better. And the other thing that we saw was that sometimes an individual teacher might pinpoint a common core standard or an educational standard wrongly. And both working in a group with other teachers who know the standards and also interacting with an AI that has them preloaded reduces the error. with which you align standards to content, which was super helpful for my teachers, just because we're being very, very strict about standards. Like in America, everybody always asks about standards-driven learning, and we're trying to do Common Core just because we're a Virginia-based school, but we want to go countrywide, and Common Core is the best curriculum to go countrywide. So that's a little bit about that project. So you can see that these 3 or 4 examples that I shared show you that CT and IA can be used to design technologies that can be resonant with user needs, as evidenced by the Thought Shuffler project, which will be expanded to neurodivergent participants hopefully this year if I get funded to do the project. These algorithms are more transparent than consumer-driven ones if you design them with CT or IA, and that's something that the team that Dr. Pangaro had, that, he's at Carnegie Mellon, but the other scholars are all over the place. They're working on using CT to build tools. These tools have more transparent algorithms that allow users to operate actively on them. Of course, the second side of this, maybe more so related to my work, is designing the educational scenarios that adopt a participant observation ethos. And the projects that I shared about designing discussions using student feedback, about understanding how best to use AI in a college classroom, where students play an active role in investigating those mechanisms with the instructor, and a collective teacher workshop for course design that the researcher also takes part in, are examples of ways to design educational scenarios for both teacher and student learning that allow there to be no power structure, right? And for there to be an open spirit of inquiry in that complex system. So of course, these are very again, complex, right? Networked phenomena. And I think that the analytic distinctions are the most basic parts of the notation proposed by Pask, helps add structure to those things. Of course, the more terse and technical aspects of his work allow you to create stellar technologies. And that's that. I think that's the twofold potential of conversation theory and interaction of actors theory. And I think that the way to bring the feedback loop into the public domain is to bring it to our learners and to our teachers.
Thank you. Thank you, Shantanu. Yeah, that was brilliant. So, reflections and questions. Either please raise your hand or put something in chat.
Yeah.
I've got a thought or two I could use to set the ball rolling, but I'd like to open it to the floor first. Maybe if I, oh yeah, go on, Richard.
First of all, Shantanu, what a fabulous presentation.
Yeah.
Utterly thought-provoking. So, first of all, thank you for sharing what is incredibly enlightening work. Bowled over by some of the, oddly enough, the co-creation thoughts you've generated for me. So you've actually extended your cybernetic network to this society. So thank you.
Thank you.
I so my kind of observation stroke question is, I come from a very different world to your education world, and
Yeah.
one of the huge problems that every jurisdiction in the world is presently facing is that particularly justice and legal processes are not coping with the variety of data that is presented in evidence. And one of the potential solutions to all of this is this idea of a socio-technical system, particularly in forensic analysis. So the human and the machine as a system generating evidence, and it's just a thought you've stimulated, because what often happens is rather like your Google commercial algorithm, companies will generate um, products based
Mhm.
on scant research and lots of technical input, but not
Mhm.
actually in a live conversation with users. So it isn't a co-created product, and
Yeah.
therefore we generate errors.
Yes.
And so I'm just making the observation that what I think you are pioneering, it could have significant implications elsewhere. So thank you for
Yeah.
doing that for me.
Thank you.
Phil, do you want to go next? Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, background noises were here. So thank you. There's an amusing bit I'll tell you about first. As I started listening to a conversation, I said, gosh, I got to tell Paul Pangaro about this guy. And then, well, halfway through, I realized you were working with him. Yeah.
I do, yes, yeah, yeah. That was actually very by chance, just because I started reading Pask's work because I saw he cited Vygotsky, so I was just like, I must read this. And then I saw that Paul was his student and he was in Pittsburgh, and that was pretty nearby to where I was. So I just shot him like a LinkedIn message in 2021, and then he was just like, sure, let's start a lab or something like together. And so I think him reaching out to Bernard after that, and then Bernard bringing his students that he's working with into the fold, has just created like this tiny community
Yeah,
that
nice.
yeah, it just happened very organically, so I'm happy that it did.
So there's a couple of actual questions too. But so
Mhm.
you were doing a thought sticker versus Google experiment. Did you
Mhm.
make sure that there was no order issue? That if you do the Google first versus thought sticker?
Oh, so I actually randomly assigned them. So it was one group of people who used Google and one group of people who used Thought Shuffler. But in the future iteration of the experiment, it's going to be counterbalanced. So I'm doing this with neurodivergent kids at Virginia Wesleyan and at my school. So I have a bunch of high schoolers here, maybe like 20 in number. And I'm going to take the 16 to 24-year-olds, and I'm going to do two conditions where both groups use both tools, but in reverse order. So one will use Google and Thought Shuffler, and then the other group will use Thought Shuffler and then Google, just so I'm controlling for that. But the previous one was random assignment to two separate groups. So it was nobody used both
An
of them.
interesting thing, how much each influences the other, even so, maybe not as simple. Then when you were working on your graphs about I think forgot the terms transitional and
Yes. Eigencentrality.
yes, have you tried doing a group size versus that?
Oh, no, I
size.
have not tried doing a group size versus that. That's actually a really good question. I should probably try and do that for a second study.
Yeah, from in teaching without AI, I've had this experience that if I break a class into no more
Smaller.
than 5 for a discussion, it works just a whole lot better. And get less, you get to 3 or so, it's not as good.
It kind of peters out. Yeah, I bet there's an optimal, and I think that goes to team's integrity, right?
Yes.
It's sort of related to team's integrity. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shanto, question I got was in terms of whether you observed the experiments and the kind of tuition situations and the co-creation, did you observe any influence that had on wider critical thinking skills, particularly around technology?
Yes. With the thought, I would say with the technology design study, it would more so have to do with the algorithm that Thought Shuffler has, just because I think it's a little simpler and a little, I'm at the risk of sounding maybe a little offensive towards it. It's a little more primitive than Google's, but like in a good direction, right? I just think that it's like filtering out all the noise that Google creates sometimes, which is why I think that critical thinking piece was superior in that group. With the classroom example where we were designing the network, I just think that a lot of the students, if you look at the graph, you'll see that the metrics sort of dropped in the first half of that class a bit. And that had to do a lot with how my advisor teaches. He's very unstructured. And often goes in without a complete curriculum because he wants they're education students. So like we want them to co-create things with us in those classes. And a lot of students don't get that, even though they're grad students. So you can see that they were kind of hesitant to the idea during the first few weeks. And they're just like, why do you keep changing the group size? But then once they figured out that there is an optimal number for that, I think it was 5 or 6 people in each group that worked better together, you can see that it stabilizes. And so I think changing that group size and making them aware like about what is going on here. They were just like, why is Shantanu like analyzing things at the end of every class? And then we explained it to them a few weeks in, and I said, well, we're changing the curriculum based on the analysis every session. So, and they were just like, oh, okay. So once they did understand that, I think they were more motivated to engage in discussions and say, well, they're designing it for us, so we should just tell them what we need. Or like the prompts that we want to discuss or that we're interested in. It also so happens that I think so this is a class that was run, it was a cognition class. It was called Cognition, Learning and Instruction. And it's an introduction class for educational psychologists and school psychologists. But usually, the ed psych students take it later in the summer, like in the year. The school psych students were the ones that took this class, and they just discussed things much differently than us. So for us to master the prompts that they wanted about like school resources or like mental health at school or teacher PD and how socio-emotional learning plays a role, like those were the things that they were interested in. So once we got the pulse of that, it sort of motivated them to discuss more and exhibit more network transitivity in those conversations. For the AI projects, I would say that Mike Sharples is to thank. Pingero showed me a paper by Mike Sharples last year, and it cited Pask a lot, which is why I was super intrigued by it first. But he was talking about a social paradigm of human AI systems where it's not a one-to-one interaction between the humans and the AI. It's a distributed interaction between the human and the machine systems that leads to the creation of new possibilities. So he said it can be a co-designer, a possibility engine, an exploratorium that can look at data with you. So we were basically looking at how it's a co-designer and a possibility engine. And so the instructions to the co-observers was let's develop as many insights as possible and let's work on the output together to see how humans can make it better. So the fact that they went in with that ethos of saying all of us are going to play a role in deciding how this can be used in, say, a college classroom or even in a course design workshop sort of lended to I would say deeper thinking about how to use the tool to create like a narrative or a lesson that a teacher could be confident in implementing.
Got it. Thank you. Margaret, do you want to go next?
Oh, you're on mute. Okay.
Sorry, I know I always have to go to the right screen. Sorry. So I was just looking at your design and thinking to myself that actually flipping between the two isn't really a proper control. You actually need like a paper version or something where people are using a library resource and then looking at exactly what differences you're getting, you know, what, and using the same measures, but trying to understand in terms of the topics and the those centrality measures, the peripheral measures, the all of the things you'd be interested in as an educational psychologist, educational what are you, an educational psychologist? Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. So I was just wondering if you might look at that a little bit again, because,
Sure.
and then also I'm also curious to see, well, what happens if, okay, so you're using Google ordinarily, but what happens if you're using Gemini in Google, for example?
It's so interesting that you say that, because this happened before Gemini came out, like this project. I was so bummed that they did that and I couldn't have the kids use it like for my project. But yeah, definitely, I definitely plan to incorporate those things into it with the Spencer Grant project, which I hope we get, because it'll be so much better with all this feedback.
So if I may, I have one more question, which I was wondering, you talk about an emergent level right in the beginning. You've got this diagram. Sorry, I did try and read almost all of your paper, but you've got a diagram in your presentations where you talk about the difference between the emergent interaction agent and the prescribed pre-educated agent. Could you
Yes.
just go through that a little bit more in some more detail for me?
Yes. So
Thank you.
when is it a specific slide in my presentation, or
Yeah, it's the I've got the picture in my head. Come on, damn it. It's right at the beginning. So you show the difference in design for the emergent versus the pre-educated, or
Oh,
the,
got it.
yeah.
Is it the first order and second order slide?
So after that, I think, yeah. So you've got your distributed system that you're
Yeah.
looking at.
Oh, okay, that.
Yeah, back there. Yeah, how the knowledge gets distributed, and where the, and yeah, that and then that. Yeah. So
Okay.
talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure. Okay, so this is a one-to-one interaction between a human and the machine,
Got
but
you.
there's no pre-prescribed. So in this previous diagram, you can see that there's a pre-prescribed entailment structure.
That's it. Yeah.
That could be like a the web of concepts about probability. So I don't know if you've used the ALEX technology, like it's a McGraw-Hill tool. It's like a machine learning algorithm that kids interact with to learn math and science. So it has
Right.
all those preloaded topics in it. So that entailment structure is defining this P individual that the machine creates, right? But over here, the interaction between the P individuals is informing the emergence of the P individual created by the epistemological laboratory, and then creating another P individual with the person. Whereas over here, this is what informs that. It's pre-packaged and within, right? Whereas in here, it's derived from the internet. So like a thought shuffler would be more like this because it's a search engine, right? But a thought sticker that you can maybe design for people to learn probability using is more like that, because it has these topics housed within it, or an ALEX technology. And then the distributed part is, so these are two people, the M1 and M2. This is the machine, that has, if you're using social media, for example, it has a bunch of posts on it. It has ideas imbued within it already. But then each of the individuals are coming to that setting, interacting with each other and with these posts, and then creating a P individual together. So again, it's abridged. This P individual is, of course, embodied by M1, M2, and the EL. But, just in the interest of keeping it neat, I like remove those embodiments. Yeah, of
Thank you.
course. It's very confusing to draw these. I hate it, but like it's needed. I think it makes things simpler. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question I got, Shantanu, was about, mentioned at the early part of the presentation, about the whole kind of representational versus the kind of ontological, the getting into the go of it. And it's something I know through the history of cybernetics over the last sort of 70, 80 years, you can kind of see different paths in cybernetics. Some have gone down the kind of the ontological go of it, see what emerges. Others have gone more representative. Could you explain just a bit more about your thoughts and what influenced your thinking to take this particular path with these bits of research?
Sure. Well, I can speak in terms of education and in terms of psychology. I think the first place that I noticed the marked difference was with teacher training. I've run a bunch of projects at Ohio State that focused on training principals and teachers to implement immersive curricula, to learn how to use technology in the classroom. And a lot of these projects came with funding mandates, or to say, like, we have to be super objective, right? But like very often we would implement these projects and then have no way to help these people after, right? You just like operate on a system, do your little thing and leave very often, like as an educational psychologist. So I wanted to make a difference and start working with my participants. And like that's kind of frowned upon in like traditional literature where you're bringing the participants into the fold. But I was just like, you know what, like it's time we start doing that more often. It's time I start involving my students in research. It's time I start involving my teachers in the research, because like they're the people on the ground. Like I'm just looking. So they need to tell me what's going on and we need to work on it together. Which is what led me, which is I guess quite naive, honestly, for me to think that it would be easy to like do it that way, but it's been powerful and it's produced a lot of good work. Um, so that's where I came at it from. I mean, I worked in a participatory fashion with my teachers last summer. At school, we have 23 faculty here. So I trained them all in using vibe interfaces to goal set. And then we did a behavior management exercise where we all analyzed the data about common behavior disruptions ourselves at school together. And then I wrote a paper about that project, but like just seeing them perk up or become more motivated to learn. Like usually teacher professional development is like this drag for a lot of people, and they're just like, oh my God, you're making me sit here for another extra hour in my day that I could use to plan. But like this was planning. It was just planning together and then turning it into a learning experience. And the data goes to show, like we did collective efficacy surveys before and after, and we saw growth and a maintenance of collective efficacy throughout the year. So for me to see that it works, right, for me to work with them to design things that they need, right, and not for me to tell them what they need, was the most powerful part of using, you know, conversation theory and second order cybernetics in my work. So yeah, that's
great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Margaret, go on.
I'm curious how error correction happens.
Okay. So, for example, last year we had designed vision boards. I'll just show you like what we did. Here. So I'm gonna try and get in here. I'm trying to change the code. So this is a super cool technology. It's called Vibe, and you can use it just using a computer system, but it comes with a physical board. And we have like 12 of these boards in our school. They come with styluses, so the teachers can work on them together, but with one person drawing on them, but then the others can join with their computers, and so they can all chill together and brainstorm together. Okay, so this is what we did for PD. You'll see I have a bunch of canvases. You can access your Vibe account. Okay, there we go. So I'll show you a richer vision board. So this is what we did. I made Venn diagrams for them based on a literature review of concepts for professional development. And so what they did was they developed their own academic goals in their varied subjects, but then they connected them across the subjects. And then they discussed them with us. And so this is one iteration of this activity, but the following year, we analyzed that and then we presented it back to them. And then we said, what do you want to do with this information? And what have you learned from last year that could expand your knowledge upon this? And then we said, what practices can you develop in your classroom based on these goals that are, you know, that span across many classes or across one or two of them, right? So you can see that working in a team spans across pretty much all of them. They're connected to being a member of the community, collaborative art making, community of caring in class, right? Collaboration in makerspace classrooms. Yeah, so you can see that What we did was I took this, I put it in our studio, and I produced this vision board network for them. And then I measured the transitivity of those networks for them too. And I said, well, this is how united you guys were and like your perceptions last year. This year, how would you expand on this information? And then they also developed these perceptions of what common behavior management problems were. So they united on those again. And then they said, well, this was what we saw last year. Did things change this year? Is there something specific we need to be doing if we kept seeing it even after developing strategies to deal with it? So that's the activity that we did the following year. But then again, like there was a second part to the first activity as well, where we said, okay, these are your goals. So we presented the goals back to them and we made them develop research questions that they were interested in answering. And so some of those research projects were actually implemented at school with the teachers in their classrooms, with the teachers being researchers with me. So that's basically how we do it here at school. And with my undergraduate students, it's mainly co-designing an activity or a project that we then publish together is usually how I apply those cybernetic principles in my classes.
Thank you.
Thank
So just to qualify that, so the error correction part comes from the learning the next year. Is there a way to speed up that loop? Could you do a sort of almost weekly update reconsideration session so that the tool literally becomes a more real-time learning process?
Yes, we
Where
could.
you're getting the group input as well, right? Not just the,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that making it more frequent would definitely help us keep it emergent, as you say, you know what I mean, in the truest sense of things. I will say that like since last year and this year were the first 2 years of us running the program, we want to take it a little slow because some people can be a little resistant to this. Especially like if they're like seasoned teachers that it's like, I don't need to know like any of this, or I don't need to do like this extra thing. So you're right, it needs to be a little more frequent. But the way that we're approaching that is gonna be just a little gradual. So maybe next year, I think I will probably make it more frequent, much to the chagrin of some of my staff, but too bad, it has to happen. So yes.
Right.
May I? I'm sorry, I'm asking a lot of questions, if I may.
Go on, Margaret. Yeah, go on, Margaret.
Sorry. So do you envisage a future where you might have the AI component adapted sufficiently to be able to offer the almost, let's say, emergency of advice that is this sort of collective input, you know, the vehicle is an agent for the collective inputs of all the other experienced people in the learning network?
I really hope so. So right now, I think Dr. Pangaro is working on, he's focusing on Thought Shuffler and Thought Sticker just because those are the readiest bits of code that we have like in the lab that are ready for implementation. And of course, I have nothing to do with programming them because I'm the psychologist on the team. So it's just like you boys do your thing and then give it to me so that I can go analyze it with humans, like real human people. But I think we are looking in the direction of developing AI or language models that are more emergent. Something that has really caught our eye recently is called a Rabbit R1. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's like a little orange pocket device that prevents it sort of helps you can talk to it and then it can basically use any app on your phone for you. But it comes with this thing called a teach mode where you can teach it to build a custom AI assistant. So I'm super excited to get a couple of those to my school because I want to give them to some of my high schoolers to see what assistants they create. So I definitely think there is scope for us to learn how to use AI like that. There is some stuff that we could do with existing technology, but I feel like for the purest experience, we're gonna have to develop something. And I feel like that's up to the lab to do. It's a very slow burn making something that like it sticks purely to that conversation theory approach, and it's just so hard to even go through like Dr. Pask's writing, to be honest, sometimes. So I'm just happy that there are people to go through it with me because yeah, it took me at least a year to like figure out what to do with it.